way out of the tea house. So please excuse the background noise. Okay, thanks everyone for coming. And we're gonna get started here in just a minute. There are a couple folks still coming in. And tonight's kind of an exciting theme. I think it's an interesting, exciting theme because it's really the foundation of tea ceremony, which is chashi, which is the tea stage upon which a tea ceremony takes place. And the tea stage actually is kind of a microcosm of the entire way of tea. It is a way of communicating both to the guests, but also of communicating one's understanding of a lot of the principles out of which the way of tea comes. So I'm going to go into those principles and explain how to think about chashi, whether it's just brewing tea for yourself at home, or if you're getting into a more complex practice, or you're brewing tea for entire groups of people. Again, I think it's particularly interesting, and I hope that all of you find it interesting as well. I'm going to try to keep this under an hour and 15 minutes because in the past, sometimes I drag on because I could talk about tea for like 20 hours straight. So I think it's good to keep it focused. So the way we're doing these sessions is we're having the first 3 cups or the 3 bowls together in silence. And so hopefully all of you are brewing tea wherever you are. If not, maybe it's a good time to go put a kettle on. And that's a way to kind of connect with what's at the essence and core of a tea practice, which is drinking tea together. Obviously, we can't drink tea together here physically because we aren't together, but part of the idea of doing these virtual sessions is at least creating the opportunity for community to happen, for people to ask questions and connect. And we've got some really exciting things happening at Living Tea where we'll have a lot of events, different teachers teaching different events, and we'll be facilitating that through a central calendar soon. And there'll also be opportunities to connect with other people who are in the community in a really meaningful way, which, you know, community is the 6th of the 6 pillars in the way of tea, as I describe it. So being able to help facilitate that community is really meaningful for us and hopefully for all of you. So keep your eyes peeled over the next couple of weeks as we kind of roll out that community calendar. So what I want to do is just start with 3 bowls together in silence and, you know, for maybe 10 minutes or so. And then that'll create a nice foundation for talking about the foundation of a tea ceremony, which is the chashi. I think that's all I kind of want to say initially. If anybody has a question, you could ask one now. But if it's something specific to chashi or the way of tea, let's wait till a little later in the session. So if you're still sipping tea, we'll kind of wrap up the third cup or bowl here, and then I'll get started. Okay. Isn't tea just the best way to start anything? I'm a little biased, but it seems to set the stage, which is what we're talking about here, for a more connected, present, grounded approach to anything and ultimately to life. I'm going to turn the music off here. So I really like this particular topic because the chashi is really an opportunity within tea for really expressing both creativity as well as intentionality, and finally consideration for your guests and for the occasion. So there's just a lot contained in shashi, and when shashi is done really well, it really ties together all the elements. It ties together the tea with the brewing method, with the occasion, the time of day, the season, the guests, the music, the incense. All of that is what works together. And when it's done harmoniously, when it's done well, two things should happen. One, the guest shouldn't really understand quite what magic is happening. And I'm using the term magic not in some esoteric sense, but in the sense of it's the whole experience together that they walk away from it saying that either that was such a beautiful experience, or that was a really deep experience, or that was a very memorable experience, meaningful, but they can't identify exactly what it was about it. So there's this concept, especially in Japanese, in Chonoyu, Japanese tea way of tea, which is that the element of surprise, not like a surprise attack, but the element of surprise of the energy, the mentality, the feeling, the experience of being surprised, and how essential and important that is to life, to a life well lived, to happiness. Some people say, oh, I don't like surprises. But if they don't know that a surprise is coming, and then it happens to be very delightful, then there's very few people who would say they don't like surprises. So for example, in Japanese gardens, in Japanese flower arrangement, ikebana, in origami, in Japanese tea, in all of the Japanese arts, they do a lot of things with miniature. And part of the idea with miniature is, you're in somebody's house and you glance over, you're looking out the window, and then you notice a tiny little frog that's made of gold sitting in the windowsill, or, you know, a little origami swan or something. So that's part of the reason they love the minuscule, the miniature, because it's surprising when you see it, and you can have these incredible details and tiny things. So that's one thing. The other thing is there's a term in Japanese architecture, in tea houses, in Japanese gardens, which is that privacy is a matter of design, not vicinity. And so you can work with a very small space, like a Japanese garden, for example, or a tea house, and create a feeling of privacy, intimacy, aesthetic beauty, working with a very small space. And that's a design issue. So these elements of design are present in Chashi. We see them in Chinese Chashi, but also in Japanese. And there are different approaches depending on whether you're drawing more from the Zen Buddhist aesthetic or Japanese aesthetic, or more from a Taoist aesthetic in Southern Chinese. The area, both the time in history and the area that we're talking about of the world, is going to inform some of the principles of Chashi. So what I've done is I've gone and looked at some of the different sources and notes I've taken over the years and years of studying tea from some of the different traditions, different approaches to Chashi, and tried to create some universals that are then you're able to easily introduce those into your approach to designing Chashi. So I'm going to refer to, I wrote them down because otherwise I go off on tangents and we'll find ourselves talking about something totally unrelated. And I want to get through this material. So you might want a pen and paper because these Saturday classes are intended to be kind of information rich. And even if it's just to write down the main principle and then exploring that principle in your own way. You don't need to write down all the little things I say. So I'm going to pull from my notes a little bit because I've tried to pull from different areas and different notes and some different articles. And then I'm trying to streamline it a bit for you. So some of these are from one of my primary teachers, Wuda, from notes from him. Some are from Master Sai, who is a friend of mine in Taiwan. Some of them are from other tea friends over the years who have read books on Chashi, some different magazine articles, etc. Global Tea Hut. So the first thing I want to say, and this is true for any Chashi from any tradition, which is, of course, all tea is related to nature, is a study of nature, is observation and introduction of principles of nature, of cyclicality, of seasons, of the 5 elements. All of those always play a role in Chashi. You're always thinking, how can I bring the natural world? So this is a kind of macro principle. How can I bring the natural world into my tea session and then share it with people? That is universally true. And one thing, anybody who loves nature, which most people who love tea, you can't love tea and not love nature. They generally are totally, that is an antithetical idea. So anybody who truly loves nature abhors uniformity, because in nature, you don't find uniformity. There's not the same, nothing is ever the same. It's in constant change. And that's probably nature's first lesson, is impermanence, change, transformation. The hidden world is always there. No tree can exist without its root system. We don't see the root system though. And this experience of impermanence, or the transitory nature, the evanescent nature of reality, is central to tea. It is necessary to appreciate tea that you have an appreciation for and celebration of impermanence. So at the most basic level, we see that everywhere in tea. You create a chashi, you think about a chashi, you think about the occasion, which is a singular occasion. You think about your guests. Have they ever had tea before, or is this their first time? Meaning like ceremonial tea. You think about, is it a special occasion? What time of day is it? What time of year is it? And then you design your chashi. And then when the whole session is done, and when you talk about impermanence, right? The bowl is empty and then the bowl is full and empty and full. The incense comes, you have an experience of it, it goes away. The tea changes from each steeping until the session is done. The flowers or whatever you have remind us of the changing nature of reality. And then when the session is done, you put the whole chashi away, you clean all your teaware, which is symbolically rinsing the session off. You honor your guests in your mind or in your heart, and then you move on with your day. The whole session is rooted in the notion of impermanence. And again, the chashi is a microcosm of the macrocosm of life, because our individual lives are also impermanent. So we are learning principles to live by in the simple act of drinking tea, which is something that I love so much. So the simple act of drinking tea is the second quality of chashi. And what I mean by that is this: the aesthetic of tea is rooted, especially in Japanese tea, in a concept called wabi-sabi. And wabi-sabi literally translates to mean desolate and forlorn. But from an aesthetic standpoint, you can think of it as the rusticity and simplicity meeting, or the everyday nature of life, in the beauty of the everyday experiences, everyday objects, and celebrating them. What elevates a normal everyday product, or not product, but object? What elevates it is our capacity for appreciating it. So you could have something like a spoon, and maybe the next time you're in your kitchen, you could try this. Just take a minute to appreciate the shape of your spoon. You know, we take things for granted so often. And when you really appreciate a spoon, then you'll never see a spoon again the same. Every house you go to, every meal you go out, you can appreciate the different shapes of a spoon and how it affects the way it fits in your mouth. Is it comfortable? Is it too big? Is it too small? Celebrating these little things in life, and a spoon is just, of course, one example, by trying to train the mind and the aesthetic sensibility to appreciate the everyday things in life, makes life very fresh. So it's the cultivation of beginner's mind, or what we say Zen mind, or we say tea mind is ordinary mind. And what it means is that you can find something extraordinary in the most mundane things. And the more you cultivate that capacity, the more reality becomes kind of extraordinary and incredible. Normal everyday things become amazing. So a good example of that is, this is a tea scoop who's made by a master ceramicist and a celebrated figure in the tea world in Taiwan. And you can see the tea scoop is it is actually the bark of a tree. I wish I knew what kind of tree it is, but I haven't been able to get that information. So at first glance, it's just the bark of a tree that's been shaped, so it's got this nice concave bowl shape. But then when you look a little bit closer, he's taken gold and silver leaf, and he's put these strokes that look like they were done with incredible attention and concentration and stillness, these strokes on little parts of it, or just these teeny little dots that are done so carefully with a paintbrush. And of course, gold, this is gold leaf. Gold and silver are rare substances. This is real gold, so it was quite an expensive piece. And it's kind of funny, if you're a tea person, people go, you spent how much on a piece of bark to put your tea leaves in? Like, that's crazy. But it's because, for me, this is a perfect example of wabi-sabi. It's an ordinary everyday thing. It's the bark of a tree. But because he had the awareness and the presence of mind, he was able to transform it into this incredibly beautiful thing. And then he used an all natural lacquer so that it doesn't have any aroma or flavor that will affect the leaves. And it's just a beautiful piece. I really love it. And then he's taken from a bamboo, so it's not the same wood, and very carefully carved this beautiful stick to go with it. So this is a good example of the of wabi sabi and of taking ordinary everyday objects and sublimating them to something special. So what I was starting off with was this notion that somebody who loves nature abhors uniformity. And it's tricky for us modern people because when we go to the grocery store, for example, every apple looks the same. Every pear looks the same. Every carrot looks the same. Every uniformity, we've been conditioned and trained to think that uniformity is a good thing. And in some ways, yes, order is good. Uniformity is good. Reality is volatile and chaotic, and the world is kind of in flux and craziness a lot of the time. So sometimes it can create a great sense of peace to have some uniformity, but it depends the type of uniformity we're talking about. So when you go stand on the edge of a forest and you look into a forest, you don't see or feel chaos. It feels like there's uniformity, there's order here, there is symmetry, and there's incredible beauty. But it's not uniform, it's chaotic, you know. Some trees are big, some are small, branches everywhere, things falling. One tree has tons of leaves, another doesn't. But you don't look at that and say, oh, it's chaos, it's disorganized. You look at it and you have a feeling sense. There is order here, there's symmetry, this makes sense. That is the kind of order and symmetry we're trying to evoke in Chashi. And part of the reason that I wanted to share that as a first principle is that some people come to tea and they start drinking tea as a daily practice. And they lay out the same mat every day and they put the same bowls in the same pot and they light the incense at the beginning and they do the same thing every time. And what you will find over time, if you're really trying to cultivate the way of tea and a practice of tea, is you'll start going, that doesn't feel quite right. And the reason is that there's thousands of years of tradition behind every chashi should be unique, because that is a practice, a cultivation of a beginner's mind. Every day is a new experience. You're a different person every day. The experience is different every day. Even if maybe you only have one bamboo runner, maybe you only have 2 teas at home and you only have 1 bowl, you can still find a way to make every day, bring an element in. Maybe go pick a branch and lay the branches out. Somebody's asking a question, but Ichigo Ichi, yeah. So this term is Ichigo Ichi, which is a Japanese term that means one chance, one encounter. And it's a beautiful aesthetic. It is the concept that every moment, every day, every experience is new. And can we arrive to that experience as being new? Where that translates in life is maybe you're in the middle of an argument with a loved one or with your partner. And all of a sudden, this, you'll hear in the back of your head, Ichigo Ichi. And you might have this sudden experience of, in this moment, I can choose. I have more freedom. There's more freedom. There's always freedom available. So maybe I can stop and pause and take a breath and say, hold on, let's just start from scratch instead of being carried on by the emotions or the charge of the experience. This is just an example of how cultivating the practice of tea over time, it really starts, the reason it's called a way is because it really starts to blend into or bleed into different aspects of life. And you start to notice the principles start informing and influencing the way you're thinking about life. So for example, I'm basically, if I'm awake and I'm in the world, I can walk into any place and I'll notice like, that would be good for tea. That stone on the edge of the forest, ooh, that would be a good tea table. Or everything relates to tea for me. And that's been nice because it's the organizing principle around which my life circulates, orbits. So I'm gonna go into this process. The chashi is the earth element. It is the stage. The goal of the chashi is to create a harmonious setting that honors the communion between the guest, the host, and nature in a chance encounter over tea. Chance encounter meaning you all could have been doing anything tonight, but it just so happened that things aligned and you saw an email or that made it a chance encounter, that we all happened to be here together. And in honoring the communion between the host, the guest, and nature, that is the way that you organize the chashi. So there's a term called he le yi shi cha, which I butchered that in terms of pronunciation. I apologize for anybody who speaks Mandarin. But the translation is, the attendees have drunk a stage of tea. And that is a term meaning that the person is not just drinking tea. The person is drinking the entire experience. And this is a central concept. You begin chashi, the first moment you have the thought, I'd like to invite some people to tea next Friday night. When they come to the experience, they're not just drinking tea in a bowl. What they are drinking is your stillness, your state of mind, your cultivation. Do you meditate? Do you eat well? Do you take care of yourself? Do you care for yourself? Do you practice the aspects of tea that lend themselves to the way of tea? So can you brew tea and be present to them? They are drinking the type of incense. There's lots of different types of aloes wood. They're drinking the type of tea that you chose, and you're pairing the different elements of the chashi to the tea. They are drinking the intentions that you're putting into the tea when you're brewing it. They're even drinking the other guests. Maybe there's people who don't know each other. They're going to be influenced by those other guests and the state of mind that they bring to the tea session. So when you think of chashi, you want to be thinking of the entirety of the tea session. You aren't just thinking about, okay, I need a runner, and I need a pot. It's not really about the objects. It's really more about the entirety, the macrocosm of the experience that you're bringing to them. The other thing that they're drinking is the extent to which you've cultivated a real tea practice. If you have a serious, mindful, consistent tea practice, you're reading about tea, you're learning about tea, you're drinking tea, you're bringing that all to the experience as well. Which is why, you can sit and drink tea with somebody who's had a serious practice for 20 years, and you can go sit with a person who's had a practice for 1 year, but they've read a lot of books about tea. Those are going to be very different experiences. Even if the water temperature is the same, the leaf amount's the same, the type of tea is the same, it's still going to be a very different experience. There's nothing to supersede practice and repetition. You can't, right? So the whole tea space is a stage upon which we practice what will eventually become a way of life. And that's when we talk about the way of tea. We find the principles for a life well lived in the way of tea. And the principles are holographic, applying equally in all areas of tea. So what that means is this. I'm going to go through these principles one by one here in a moment. Any one of those principles, you could apply it to every single aspect of tea. That's what I mean by it's holographic. It doesn't just apply to chashi. It comes out of the way of tea, which means you can apply it in any aspect of it. So that's something to think about. The last thing I want to say as an introduction, see, this is why I need notes, because this is like the longest introduction of all time. There are many different approaches to chashi, from pragmatic and simple to philosophical, artistic, and even spiritual. For a more approachable review, I'm going to start with the former and move towards the latter. So I'm going to focus kind of on the practical aspects of chashi, and then as I move through it a little bit, I'll get into some of the more philosophical or even spiritual concepts. Okay, so I'm going to brew a cup of tea. That always slows me down a little bit. Hopefully you guys are enjoying some nice tea on that side. For inquiring minds, I am drinking a Liabao called Quiet Before the Dawn. And, or Quiet Before the Storm, I believe. This is a really beautiful tea from 2008, I want to say. I'm drinking a lot of different Liabao right now because we're including one in the seasonal tea club that goes out at the end of this month. And Liabao is really beautiful if you want to drink a dark tea in the hotter months in the summer, in the late spring. because it's actually cooling in the body. So it's a nice dark tea, but it is actually cooling in its effect. I really, really love this tea. And at this time of year, I start to drink more Liu Bao, and then come June, July, whenever I drink dark tea, it's basically a Liu Bao. So it's a fermented tea. It's a little bit like Shopur if you've never had it before. Okay, so we're going to talk about 5 considerations. These are the 5 considerations to think about when you first start to design a chashi. So first, I'll just mention what they are, and then I'll go into a little bit of detail. The first one is the people, who's coming to your tea ceremony. The second is subject, and that is what is the subject or the theme of your chashi. The third is time of day, time of year. The fourth is location, and the fifth is the objects or the teaware itself. So I'll say a couple things about that. The first one is people. This means attending to your guest, especially in Japanese tea ceremony. Attending to the guest is what comes primary. Learning to be of service is really what the way of tea is about, learning to serve people. And that means external consideration, not thinking, well, what do I think would be great? What do I think this person would like? It's a little bit like your friends who, you have friends who are incredible at giving gifts for Christmas or birthdays or whatever. What makes them incredible at that is they're not considering what they think you would like. What they're doing is really thinking about you. They're actually deeply considering you. And then they're buying what you would like, actually, not what they think you would like. So I don't know if that distinction is clear, but it has to do with really considering your guests. So are they experienced tea drinkers? Are they guests who you don't know? Are they acquaintances? Are they friends? Are they cha-jin or tea drinkers, people who really drink tea? All of those things are taken into consideration because maybe it's their very first time coming to formal tea. Just because you want to impress them with brewing fancy tea with lots of fancy teaware doesn't mean that's what is appropriate. If it's really their first time, maybe what's appropriate is just leaves in a bowl, very simple, so that they don't get intimidated. Oh, I need special teaware and if I want to get into this. But they see all I need is leaves and a bowl and a kettle with good water and some space. Because that person over time might actually start to pursue a way of tea and actually gain a lot from it. Whereas if their first experience is, oh, I need all these expensive articles of teaware and it seems very complex and on and on and on, the likelihood of them really exploring it and getting into it is not very high. So you want to really take into consideration the people who are coming. Okay. The second is the subject. So this is what is the theme, purpose, and the focus of the session. Are you trying a new tea? Are you opening an art exhibition? This is an art gallery. This painting, you can't see the top of it, but it's a new painting done by Jade, my partner. We can't wait to open the tea house in May to start to share this artwork. But for example, if it's an art exhibition, an art gallery opening, then you're not going to brew tea that requires people to be super attentive to every detail. You're maybe going to do boiled tea. And it's going to be a little more casual and people can just casually sip tea and talk about art or music or something. So what is the subject of the tea session? If you're trying a new tea that's really special, then don't have a lot of superfluous stuff on the table. Just make it about the tea. This is actually an important point, which is the first guest and the primary subject of any chashi, of any tea ceremony, is tea itself. Always the centerpiece. So I've been to these exhibitions, tea exhibitions in different parts of the world, or you see different tea exhibitions, and people will design these incredibly elaborate tea stages, with like a waterfall and a Buddha under a giant bonsai, and very complex. And they forget the primary and first principle, which is it's about tea. That's what it's about. So all the elements of a chashi should draw your attention to the center, to tea, always back towards the center. So that's subject matter. The third is time, season, time of day, and the length of the session. If it's going to be a 30-minute tea session, maybe we do whisk tea and it's one bowl. Maybe you do leaves in a bowl of a tea that's really beautiful for 4 or 5 steepings, but that's it. It comes and goes. Maybe you do green tea. People love green tea, and the reason it's so central to Zen Buddhism, because it's evanescent. It comes and it goes like a dream. So the aroma of green tea, the flavor is there, it's full-bodied, but then it leaves quite quickly. Other teas linger and linger and linger, and you can brew them for 20 steepings. Those are appropriate for a really long tea session, but not for a short one. So timing is important. What season is it? So you might notice here that these are flowers that are yellow and pink, and they are native to this time of year in this area, in this region. So, I mean, we're up at a high elevation, so we're still covered in snow, but you go down valley a little bit, you want flowers or foliage or elements that remind you of the season. They bring the season in. So you read in the classic of tea, this concept that in the summer evoke coolness while also honoring the summer. In the winter, evoke warmth while also honoring the winter. Now you can do that with color schemes. You can do it with the way you brew tea. For example, if you're doing boiled tea in a big cauldron, there's a fire underneath it. It looks like a big thing of soup, right? You have a ladle. That evokes a sense of warmth. We do that all the time in the winter. We brew boiled tea, very, very hot, over coals, like burning coals. That really brings a feeling of warmth to a winter session. Whereas in the summer, we might use smaller cups and gung fu and do quick steepings with a lot of steam, and but it's a green tea, and so the green tea is quite cooling. So the point is, play around here with seasonality based on the colors, and you can look into the 5 elements in the Chinese system called Wu Xing. So you can look up 5 elements, Google it, and explore the colors of each season. Okay, so that has to do with time. Location is the location natural or man-made? So are we sitting in the middle of a forest drinking tea, which if you haven't had outdoor tea sessions, they're absolutely sublime. When you're doing an outdoor tea session, the chashi is the entire forest around you. So you don't need, it should be very simple at that point. As little man-made intervention as possible. Whereas if you're brewing tea in a hotel lobby, I don't know why you would be doing that, but if you were, and it's a very man-made kind of superficial environment, then you would want to bring more elements out of nature to bring a sense of bringing nature into the environment. So it's all about, yin and yang. So you're balancing out the environment that you're in. Is it indoor or outdoor? Is it compact or spacious? So this is a good one. I've done a lot of tea sessions for big groups. If you're sitting in a huge room and you're sitting on the floor, you're doing it on the floor and it's a big room and you've got a little chashi set up, it's going to feel really awkward in such a big space. So when you're in a big room, use a chabu, a runner that's really long and make it dramatic, put a whole thing out, maybe take a dry tree and hang it over you. It's okay to be more dramatic and more ebullient aesthetically in a space that's very large. You can fill the space more. Maybe you have an incense censer that burns a lot of smoke into the air, so you can bring more into the space. Whereas if you're in a very small, tight space, you want to use, maybe you want to brew gung fu and you want to work with the tiny bonsai and you want to work with smaller elements. So those are the things: natural or man-made, indoor or outdoor, compact or spacious. So thinking about the environment and the space that you're in. Another thing is, maybe you're in a big space and you want to create intimacy. One way to do that is through light. I always say like my alter ego is, I think, a lighting guy. Like I am obsessed with lights. Um, Lamps in a space make the space much more intimate. And if you want to create a real intimate space, you might even be in a big room. Candles. Candles immediately create intimacy in a space. Using warm lights instead of cooler lights immediately creates intimacy in the space. If you are creating a tea room at home, try getting rice paper Japanese lanterns and putting them on the floor in the corners of the room or behind you. Immediately creates intimacy and creates kind of a space of this. It brings the sacred into the space. So those are my five starting principles. So people, subject, time, location. Oh, and the fifth, sorry, I haven't mentioned it yet, is the objects or the teaware itself. Now, there's really two considerations when you think about the objects, the teaware you're using, which is the appropriateness to tea and to the theme. So once you've created your theme, then you determine what kind of teaware, but they go hand in hand, right? So for example, I'm brewing side handle tea. It would be inappropriate for me to have a zisha clay tray that you use for gung fu tea and then to put this in it. You don't want to mingle different brewing methods. So instead I have a flat wicker, like a wicker trivet, which my side handle is sitting on. Another consideration, for example, is this is from an old Chinese loom. It's an antique loom. And I'm using this because the chabu I'm using is very beautiful. You can see the flowers here. And I'm brewing a dark tea, and I don't want that dark tea to spill on the chabu and stain it. So I've created just a layer of protection. But again, this is adhering to the principle of rustic simplicity, or repurposing non-tea items and turning them into tea items, which is something we love, finding objects that aren't tea items and repurposing them. The last piece is, like I said, rustic simplicity, using things that evoke the natural world and nature. I'm brewing tea by myself tonight. I'm brewing a dark tea. It's the kind of tea that I really like to drink as a bowl tea. And also I drink a dark calming tea because it's nighttime where I am. A dark calming tea like Liu Bao, I really prefer to brew side handle. If it was a different tea I was brewing for the occasion, I might brew a gung fu, I might boil it, etc. The next piece is I'm using these bowls. Let me show you here. I don't know if you can see this, probably not, but I'm using a bowl that's got a very light interior. These beautiful bowls we are carrying right now, they're made by our friend Ben Suga. And the thing I love about them the most is the glaze is a cracked glaze. So if you put a tea in it that you can see through, because this Liu Bao is not too dark, then you can see all the cracks in the glaze. So you're taking into consideration using teaware that complements each other. You wouldn't want to use some weird little cup that doesn't go with bowl tea. And that, you want things to match. You're trying to create harmony. That's at the core of this. And you may have noticed in the first steeping, I put a bowl over here. Putting the bowl out for me is actually my way of thanking. It's saying I honor and acknowledge, and I'm saying thank you to all the guests who are coming and hanging out with me on a Saturday night while I talk about tea. So you can put a bowl out at the beginning. Maybe it's for somebody who's suffering, somebody who's having a hard time, somebody who you want to acknowledge or call to mind or invite energetically into the tea session. Or maybe it's for a clear intention that you have. There's something you're really working on. Putting a cup or a bowl out is a way of honoring and acknowledging the occasion or a person. Or maybe you're having a tea session with a group of friends and there's one friend that missed their flight from Detroit and they can't come to your tea session and they're so upset about it. You can put a cup or a bowl out to invite them kind of energetically into the session. So the next piece is our friends over at Earth and Element, my friend Liz. She made these incredibly beautiful domed, I don't know if you can see this, these domed vases where you can fit 14 leaves in it, or 15 leaves, and you can create really these beautifully stunning arrangements. We also carry these. I've only got a couple of them because it takes her a long time to make them. But I love this because it naturally creates something called Nigire, which is in Chabana, which is a flower arrangement for tea. It creates the effect of the thrown in effect, which is like how you might find these flowers growing out in a field. You want things to feel like that you'd find them in their natural environment. So with all these little holes, you can create the effect of how you might find them just growing in a little bushel in a field. And I really love these little vases. I think they're beautiful. So, and then you can't see it very well, but the floral arrangement on here really evokes the transition from winter into, or from winter to spring to summer, because there are all these dried up twigs and leaves that are kind of brown, but then it's interspersed with all this color. So it's a really appropriate chabu for the time of year, which is nice. And the chabu is one way that you can bring color into the tea session, because generally with teaware, we tend towards natural colors or colors, earth tones that you would find in nature, right? So most of the teaware you see, it looks like rock or stone, and it's been hewn out of stone, or it's the bark of a tree. Again, that's all because we're pointing back to nature. We're reminding people, especially in our digital crazy age, that humans are nature and that we need to honor and respect the place from which we came and what we are. So, okay. That was the end of my 5 objects. Now let me see how we're doing on time here. Pretty good. Okay. So I'm going to try to move through the last bits of this kind of quickly. So the planned lines should be smooth and fluid, drawing your eyes to the main guest, which is tea. So the lines of a tea ceremony, let me move this out of the way, of your chashi, the lines of it should point back towards the center. They should be smooth and fluid. So for example, you might see people do design elements where they might fold their chashi or their chabu, and create waves or something like that. So these kind of movements are fine because they're drawing your attention back to the center. And also they're evoking waves like in the water. If you were going to evoke waves in the water though, you would want to make sure that you have a water themed chabu. So maybe you're drinking water fairy, which is a yencha, or you're drinking a tea that tastes like mineral water, like a liubao or a shopor. You want the themes to be consistent. If you're going to create a watery element thematically, then make sure that it makes sense with the rest of what you're doing. Nothing in the chashi should be arbitrary. Everything has a reason, a purpose, such that if some tea master came and they said, okay, why do you have, some reishi mushrooms in a bowl sitting right there? You have a very clear answer. I'm wishing to evoke wisdom, because reishi is the herb of wisdom, in acknowledgement that I've got a guest of honor, a tea master visiting me, or whatever. That's a weird example. But the point is that every element of the chashi is intentional. Okay, and the lines should be smooth and fluid. So the next time you lay down your chabu, take the time to make sure that the lines are really straight. If it's wrinkled, then iron it. Most tea tables, you can put the iron on the lowest setting and actually iron out, if it's fabric, iron it out right on your tea table. Again, your guest is not going to necessarily know, they're probably not going to know that you ironed the chabu. But when all these elements of intentionality and care, you showing I care, I'm doing this out of respect for my guest, all of those come together and they are felt by people. When you put that much intention and care into something, then when people leave, they go, I don't know why, but for some reason, I've never felt that much like taken care of, kind of. So it's a little bit like when you go to a really great restaurant, and you're just like, wow, the service is incredible, because it feels like the server actually cares about my experience. They're actually certain, they want to make sure that I have the best possible experience. When you go to like a Michelin star, like some famous restaurant, it's very subtle. You're not quite sure why. They're being attentive, but you walk away going, that was a unique experience. I don't know what happened there, but I felt so taken care of. It should be the same thing in a tea session. When it's done really well, the person doesn't even notice. They just leave going, whoa, I don't know what just happened, but that was amazing. Okay, so this is an important part of chashi. The handling of teaware should never make a guest feel rushed, uncomfortable, or inconvenienced. So when you're handling your teaware, you should handle it in a calm manner, slow, don't be distracted, attentive. I just noticed things in this tea bowl that I've never noticed, because at the beginning I was slowing down, and then you appreciate all these beautiful things. When you slow down and you offer the teaware, and it's been chosen intentionally, and you slow down and you're noticing things, all of a sudden the guest is going to start noticing things. And they might go, whoa, I just saw something in this beautiful teaware that I would have never noticed otherwise. Again, that's this element of surprise. It's a wonderful thing to be surprised and not see it coming, There is a concept in, again, Japanese tea, that you pick up things that are light as if they're very heavy. So if I'm picking up this scoop, I pick it up slowly as if it's the heaviest object in the world. You don't over dramatize it, but you pick it up slowly, kind of like maybe even two hands, as if it's really heavy. And you pick up heavy things like they're light. Okay, so you kind of gingerly pick up the kettle and you pour as if it's very light, even though it's the heaviest thing on the table. That's also just the concept of playing with perception. So, okay, heavy things are light and light are heavy. Okay, so as I said, evoking the proper mood. So using pottery on cool days and glass on warm days. So maybe it's a really warm day and you might use some glass. Generally, I tend towards all ceramic ware or pottery or stoneware because it brews better tea. But maybe it's a really hot summer day. Try brewing green tea in a glass pot with a glass chahai, a pitcher, and glass cups. It will evoke a sense of coolness. So that's just an example of offsetting it. Okay. Now, I want to go through 9 principles. I'm not going to go into extraordinary detail on each of these. I'm going to leave them open to all of you, and maybe I'll do a Chashi part 2 video or invitation Zoom session and go into depth on these, because they're quite deep principles. We could talk about any one of them for a long time, but I just want to share them with you so that you have them and then you can explore them on your own, or you can ask questions afterwards. The first is honor the guest and the occasion. So the first principle, honor the guest and the occasion. This has to do with decorating or creating the chashi and cleaning up afterwards. That's how you honor the guest. I'll go into a little more detail afterwards. The second is keep tea as the focus. We already talked about that. Less is more. There's no neutral element. Every little thing you add to a chashi changes it, makes it more complex. Start with the most simple and then slowly add to it. So you should start with an empty mind, start from the idea of emptiness, sit at your tea space empty first and see, okay, maybe there's that pot. Oh, there's that pot. That's the pot that would be perfect for this. And build around a central element. Some of the most sublime tea sessions I've ever had, it was just of Chabo and bowl tea. That's it, nothing else. It has a lot to do with, was that appropriate to that experience? Maybe you're meeting with a friend and they're going through something very difficult. That is not the right occasion to have a very complex chashi. That should be a very simple chashi that feels very welcoming and inviting. You can still keep tea as the central guest, but you're creating more space for that person to share or to work through something or to talk about something. The third is don't forget function. That's the third element. We talked about function in terms of occasion, guest, choice of tea. The first focus is the function of the occasion. What is the function of the occasion? The second thing is the form, the beauty. So function first, form second. Beauty or the form should serve the function. So the example I have here is, it's like a meal that is both delicious and nutritious. A meal that's really delicious, but you feel awful afterwards, undermines the deliciousness, right? There's lots of fried food and ice cream and things that taste delicious, but you don't feel well afterwards. Whereas if it is really nutritious, but it's just kale and some salt, you're kind of like, it leaves you wanting something. A really good chashi, a really good tea session is like a wonderfully executed meal, and that in that it serves its function very well, but it is also beautiful and it is appropriate. Okay. The next, the fourth principle is focus on the theme. We've gone over that quite a bit. I'll say a little bit more about it, but at the moment I don't want to go over too much. The fifth is start with emptiness. We just talked about that. In a life of tea, there's no separation from one tea session to the next. What you do between the sessions greatly influences the next. So this is where we talk about the way of tea. Are you meditating? Are you sleeping well? Are you eating well? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you finding opportunities for service? Are you doing livelihood or work that is aligned with your values? How are you living your life? Because all of that is going to inform your tea. Without meditation, you can't really rest in emptiness. And without emptiness, you don't have the foundation out of which real chashi comes from. So quiet the mind. You know, the first thing to do with chashi is to quiet the mind and allow the chashi to emerge. Allow gravitas, like heaviness or levity, to emerge naturally. And again, when you're creating, I said at the beginning, a person who loves nature abhors uniformity. If every day you're creating the same tea setup, then you're not cultivating the mind of creativity. People say, oh, I'm not creative. And I ask them, do you appreciate beauty? They say, of course I appreciate beauty. And I say, then you're creative. It is a creative act to appreciate the beautiful because you have to meet it halfway. It's the same thing with chashi. If every day you're coming with a fresh mind, a new mind, then you'll find yourself having dreams or having new ideas. Or, you know, I remember I had a dream one night, and in the dream I was brewing tea for a group of friends. And in the middle of it, I took flowers out. There were 3 bowls on the table, just with water in them. And I took out 3 flowers and I threw them into the bowl of water, and it splashed over the table. And then we went back to silence. And it was a bizarre dream. I woke up and was like, what was that all about? And I realized they were kind of expressions of Zen. You know, they woke you up. And it was beautiful. All of a sudden there's this stunning flower floating in a bowl of water. And there are little punctuations in this tea ceremony. So you just have these weird ideas that might come to mind about chashi, or about, when you're walking around, you'll start noticing different plants growing, and you'll think, oh, I could incorporate that in this interesting way. But that kind of spontaneity is not going to come unless you're creating space for creativity and spontaneity every day. So the fifth principle, start with emptiness. The sixth is arranging a chashi. So instead of thinking through the question that life is confronting you with, sit quietly and let your thoughts settle down. Allow the answer to emerge spontaneously. Go straight to the solution. So this is a quote from Wuda, a dear friend and teacher. He's saying, consider the different factors, consider the factors of the tea session and the principles we're talking about. Think about them for a little bit and then let go. Rest on your intuition. So you want to develop discernment in an intellectual approach to chashi, but you also then want to let that go and allow your intuitive, creative, unconscious mind to start to inform how you design what you design. Great architects, great chefs, great photographers, great artists, they don't go, okay, well, today I'll be using blue. I'm going to use blue in the right corner. I'm going to make 19 lines. Like, of course not. That's not going to create great art. Great art comes out of spontaneity and creativity. So you consider the occasion, you consider what you're creating, you consider the people and the time and all these factors, but then you let it go and allow your intuition to inform it. You need both of those to create great chashis. And then we have this concept in tradition, which is advanced techniques are basic techniques mastered. So it's good to start with a limited selection of tea stage elements, because it's then easier to connect with the spirit of tea, which is not about stuff. The spirit of tea is not about stuff. So I've said this a lot of times. People get into tea and they start buying all this teaware before they've even developed a real relationship with one bowl or a real relationship with one pot. They start just buying. And, this is fundamentally against the basic principles of tea. The basic principles of tea would say, can you harness the wind? Can you gather the wind and put it in your bag? Can you take the leaves with you, or the perception of value, right? We say you take 20 grams of 100-year-old pu'er and 20 grams of some young green tea, and one of them costs thousands of dollars and the other one costs $10. Throw them both in the forest and it's going to turn into 40 grams of dirt real soon. So perception of beauty is totally subjective. What's more important is the spirit out of which it comes. So the spirit of tea is not about stuff. It's actually about creating space. So start really simple. Don't just start getting a bunch of stuff. Start really simple. See what you have around your house. You'll find people who are real tea people. You'll notice they start, they pick the twig off the tree and that becomes their tea stick, or some bark they find on the road, or a rock, or, whatever. It's really about simplicity and simplifying and minimalism. Every element you add to the chashi makes it more complex. So start simple and just add a little bit at a time. It takes discipline because we have cluttered minds in this time of life, with technology and Instagram and Google and everything. I mean, you have there's so much to think about. It's hard to not have a cluttered mind. The tea space should be a place where you can put a lot of it down and slow down. Okay. Then the seventh principle is the elements of a chashi. You want to treat these objects with respect as if you're building a temporary altar. I love this idea of a temporary altar. I had this idea years ago when I lived in California. I'd go to people's houses and they were usually over the top, but people would have these beautiful altars, to Kuan Yin or the Buddha or Jesus or whoever they prayed to. But they'd have these really beautiful altars, and there were spaces that were really pure because that was a person's heart. It was, their devotional altar. And I kept seeing these incredibly stunning altars in people's houses. And I wanted to do a photo project of photographing people's altars and then letting that person talk about what it means to them and what they're expressing through the altar. And I didn't do that because I realized an altar is so deeply personal. It really isn't something that other people should see. So this tea stage, you can think of it as a temporary altar, and the deity that you are honoring with your altar is your guest. And I love this just as a concept. You know, it's creating the frame of mind of, I'm going to treat this person as if we're not separate, and that I want to devotionally honor them through this, what I'm creating here for them. Also, if you might think that you're not a creative person, this is an opportunity to cultivate creativity. And you can keep returning to it, and you can practice it every day if you drink tea every day. So some of the things to think about in terms of elements of the altar. Are you creating a very elegant and kind of more modern chashi, in which case that requires certain elements? Or are you creating more of a wabi-sabi and a rustic natural setting? Are you trying to evoke an element like water? Are you trying to evoke, wood or metal or fire? What kind of mood do you want to invite in? What kind of music is going to match the kind of mood? Like, you can create a playlist, on Spotify or whatever, and have that playlist accompany the mood you're trying to evoke with your chashi. So there's so many different ways to bring all these elements together. Here's another thing. Let's say you're going to brew a really floral tea like danchong or dongding, a type of really floral, sweet oolong. Because the person who you're brewing tea for, you feel like they're a little downtrodden and their heart's a little bit closed and they have a hard time coming out. So you brew a tea that's really heart opening and it's floral and sweet and uplifting. Then maybe for your incense, you burn a more floral aloes wood instead of a really woody, spicy type of aloes wood. Maybe you evoke something in your floral arrangement. Maybe the type of teaware, the type of music. Just think about these elements when you're preparing it. So what do we want? Okay, here's one concept I want to say in terms of the elements of the chashi. The chabu that you're choosing should contrast the tea, your teaware. So for example, this is a blue chabu, and I'm using these brown elements on top. And they're a beautiful contrast. So they're not discordant, they're harmonious, brown and blue, but they are different enough in color and shade that there's a clear distinction between the two. So really a perfect chashi, there are elements that are complementary but different. So for example, these bright yellow flowers are really beautiful against this blue, along with the brown. So all of these different elements in a maroon incense censer, all of these different elements complement each other, but they're different enough to create distinction. So, and again, by having a contrasting tea pillow, you are keeping tea as the center point, the focal point of the chashi. Okay, now 7. Oh, the last piece I want to say about teaware is that the value of a piece of teaware is reflected in the tea that it makes and the state of mind that it brings to the space. So that's from a Japanese tea master, Rikyu. Again, the value of a piece of teaware is reflected in the tea that it makes and the state of mind it brings to the space. So there is a lot of beautiful teaware out there in the world, but that does not mean that it brews good tea. If it doesn't brew good tea, it is not useful for people who are pursuing a life of tea. And the state of mind it brings to the space. Again, I love Arturo's pots, these wood side handle pots, because they evoke nature. You know, you're literally holding a stick, and a lot of his feel like stone. So they should really draw you into the space and center you in the space. So those are the 7 principles I want to talk about. The last 2 we've covered inadvertently through the other pieces. And the last thing I'm going to say is you don't want to put things so far out in your chabu that you have to strain to reach them. You know, you really want to be able to stay centered. And you want to be able to maintain the center yourself. When you're brewing tea, everything should come back to the center. The hands come back to the center. The mind comes back to the center. Everything comes back to the tea. If you're able to maintain that focused attention, then all your guests will also feel themselves drop in. For those of you who brew tea for other people, you know that there's this point that happens. It's this magical moment where you feel people drop in. They go, ah, there's an energetic shift where they're almost given permission to let go of pretension, let go of needing to show up a certain way, to have your personality be a certain way, to be somebody, to identify with a role. All of that drops, and there's a feeling of oneness between the people in the tea ceremony. One of the most essential ways that we evoke that is through the chashi, because it's all these different elements working together. And the last thing I will say is that you are part of the chashi. And I know I've said this a number of times in different ways, but take into consideration that your energy is as much a part of the tea ceremony as any of the elements. Try to create enough time and space before a tea session where you're sharing with people for you to just sit in the space and center yourself. Oftentimes we don't leave enough time. We rush through getting ready and we're like all flustered, and then people show up. I'm sure nobody here has had that experience, but if you're all flustered when you sit down to tea, it's very hard for other people to drop in. They should arrive to a space where the incense is burning, the kettles are ready, and you're already centered and grounded. And the chashi is centered and grounded, and it's already been prepared in advance. And that takes a little bit of discipline. Something I often say is discipline is only difficult until it becomes habit. So whether that's getting up early in the morning and meditating, or eating a healthy diet, or exploring chashi every day, experimenting with something new, that all seems like an inconvenience until it becomes habitual, and then it becomes a real joy. So discipline is difficult until it becomes a habit, and once it becomes a habit, it becomes a joy. So I invite you to reflect on some of these principles. I will in the future maybe do a deeper dive into those 9 principles, because we only really went through 7 of them, but I've been talking nonstop for an hour and a half, so I need to shut up. And we can go a little deeper into some of the specific principles. But that's kind of some of the basics ideas of a chashi, right? I hope that all of this has been very helpful and instructive, and that you gain something from some of these ideas and you can start thinking about them in your chashi. You know, at Living Tea, we really aspire to only share and carry wares, teaware and, you know, vases and scoops and things that we ourselves use every day, and that are really high quality and natural and handmade by people we know. And, you know, we've got some beautiful teaware at the moment. And as I teach different classes on different subjects, I'll go more into depth about specific items. So for this particular chashi, again, we also have some really beautiful new side handle pots from Arturo that are made with these wood handles. We just got in a bunch of really beautiful new bowls from our friend Ben. And again, these vases. So if there's specific things that you're looking for, we just got in some new pieces. I say that to all of you who are here because oftentimes our T word disappears very quickly if you're looking for specific things. Um, and also, I've been working for a long time to get some different types of aloes wood incense because there's a lot of incredible aloes wood out there. And we just got in some aloes wood from Baido, which is a Japanese company. It's not sold in the US. It took me a while to find it. I'm really thrilled that we have it. And that will be available on the website. I'm going to put it up tomorrow. So if you're looking for different types of really nice aloes wood, we'll also have that. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. I hope that was valuable for all of you. I hope you got something from it. And I'm going to open it up for questions here. Of course, if you need to go because it's Saturday night and you got things to do, then please go with my blessing. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this class and this session together. It's about 7:28, so I went over. What are you going to do? And I can't read the comments from here because it's too far away. But if you want to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
I have a question. It's gonna be product related, unfortunately, but are you going to be having more wastewater bowls? Because that is one element that I am sorely lacking, and I hate using just regular old cereal bowls.
Yeah. Yes, thank you for the question. We have about 10 very beautiful wastewater bowls that we're going to get it sometime this week. The ones that we carry, usually I travel twice a year to China, Taiwan, etc. And I haven't been able to go for the last year. So we've had to rely on friends and potters in different parts of the world who have been so gracious in helping us get tea and teaware here. And as much as possible, we like having things made locally, but I don't want to carry teaware that's not made by somebody who's a real tea drinker and who doesn't understand the intricacies. Like there's so many things that go into teaware that make it really masterful or mediocre or not great or just bad. Like the teardrop shape on the spout of a pot, the angle of the pot, the relationship of the spout to the top, the weight of the pot, on these bowls. We've worked on these bowls for 4 years, and Ben has refined them and refined them and refined them, both in terms of the glazes and the clays, but also the thickness of the wall, so it's not too hot, but also not too thin, the way it feels in your hands. You see this tulip shape at the edge of the bowl, how it rests on the lip. All of these little things go into it. This is a very long-winded answer, but the point is we are getting wastewater bowls in this week. And I think they're going to be in 2 or 3 different glazes. JC, who's a local friend and a tea lover, she also makes our chawan for matcha. She's going to be dropping them off and with some glazes that she hasn't worked with before on those bowls. So she's also working on a couple different sizes. So, you might need a bigger one for Gung Fu because you go through a lot of water, whereas for bowl tea, you don't need a huge one. So we're making some smaller ones. So the answer is, I could have just said, yes, we'll have them this week, but I can't, when you start talking to me about tea, I just get all excited. I don't know what to say.
That's okay. I'm the same way with my side handle teapot. I got it actually directly from Arturo. I actually found Living Tea through his Instagram.
Cool.
And I am very protective of my teapot. Like I only let myself touch it. I'm that protective of it because when I first saw it, it kind of called to me. It was just one of those things where I first saw it and it's just like, wow.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
have not found another teapot yet that has spoken to me at the same level.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying. If you say that to other people, they're like, what are we talking about? We're talking about teapot, right? But if you've been exploring the way of tea for some time, then then we know exactly what you're talking about. Because even if you want to think about it on very simplistic terms, why is it that out of the thousands of pots I've seen and held in my life, there's 8 or 9 of them that I absolutely love and cherish and that have just jumped out at me. There's a unique relationship there. And if you take care of your teaware and you're protective of it, like you said, I've seen a lot of broken teaware in my time, right? And people don't have the same relationship to it. So if you're protective of it, you can drink tea and enjoy it out of that thing for a whole lifetime, and pass it on to your children or nephew or niece or whoever. That's one thing. The other thing is, there are these articles of teaware from famous tea masters that have been passed on for over 1,000 years. I've got some teacups, gongfu cups, that are 350 years old, and they by far brew the best tea. It is like, even people who aren't tea drinkers, I'll do an experiment and just put it in regular porcelain and then brew tea in one of these cups. And they're like, oh yeah, it does seem much softer and smoother. That's so weird, like, so teaware is really a personal thing. It is your own appreciation for symmetry and beauty and abstract qualities that is uniquely your own. And then there's the item itself, and then there's the potter who made the item, and then there's the clay that came out of the earth. There are all these elements. And when you really respect your teaware, then you can derive just a lifetime of joy out of it. So I totally understand what you're saying. And I think other people who have like a cherished article of teaware probably know what you mean as well.
And it doesn't even have to be something like expensive or something like that. I like collecting Japanese plates, and I chipped one, and it wasn't like a really expensive plate or anything, but it meant a lot to me. So I actually got a kintsugi done for it because I didn't want to just have it collect dust or not be used, because the plate's probably like $10 or something, mass produced, whatever, but it was special enough to me that I got it plated with gold. And now it's even more valuable that way.
Yeah, of course, of course. And if anybody has a broken article of teaware, a friend of mine just started doing, she's been practicing for a while, but she does kintsugi, which is a Japanese technique of repairing broken things. And again, that's consistent with this aesthetic of wabi sabi, or it's something that's broken that's then been healed or fixed, that makes it even more beautiful, because it captures the truth of a human life. We are all broken in our own way. We've all had traumas or abuses or difficulties or breakups or things that happened at some point in our life that broke us on some level, right? But it's the way that we heal and we grow through that creates our character. And that's what makes a person beautiful, right? In the same way that a broken article of teaware that's been fixed with care and gold is more beautiful and more valuable in some ways than one that's perfect out of the kiln. So.
Hi, Colin. Thank you so much again for hosting us today. I have a question. It's a little bit more philosophical.
Okay.
With this study of tea, which I've been doing for a couple of years, I took a break and now I'm going back into it. So I'm just grateful that you're hosting us and sharing your knowledge. But as someone who has knowledge in many different things and have studied for a long time, what are your thoughts on dedication to one path?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And it's one that I really struggled with. I have an answer that I think is poignant. And when I had been studying tea for quite a while in university, which was over 20 years now ago. First of all, thank you for the question. It's a wonderful question. And I did a minor in university in Asian religious studies and was very interested in Zen Buddhism, in Taoism, in various branches of Hinduism, in Hermeticism, etc. And I felt confused by that. I went to Jesuit high school, all boys high school at Jesuit University, and I had these Jesuit, Catholic priests who were teaching existentialism and the 8 branches of yoga and Taoism. And I'm like, this is so confusing. Why are these Catholic priests teaching all these Eastern philosophies and French philosophy? And like, I was confused because I had this idea, there's got to be a true path. There's got to be a most effective path or a way that is truer than others or more effective than others. And I went and lived in Spain and I studied African shamanism with a guy for a year. And then I, came back and I moved and lived in an ashram and studied Kundalini yoga with a Swami for 2 years in the Shaivik tradition. So that was, Shiva and a lot of yoga. And then, it just like kind of went on and on. Then I was in the Gurdjieff work for years. And then I went to school for Chinese medicine and studied Taoism. And I was so fragmented, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, from having studied all these different traditions, that by the time I was like 29 years old, 30 years old, I felt deeply confused about how to live with integrity because I had all these different teachings from different lineages. And I'd studied a number of them in some degree of depth. And I felt deeply sad and frustrated because I felt like I don't understand. There are aspects about surrender that I think are important in that tradition. And there are aspects about cultivating energy and your psychic system in that tradition. And there are aspects of self-inquiry and self-observation from this other tradition. And so I thought, well, they all need aspects from each other to create a true system. And I was deeply frustrated by that. And I decided to go to Asia really on a vision quest, with the intention of learning more about tea, because I really wanted to go directly to the tea trees, but also because I realized I want clarity about which of these paths I'm going to really dedicate my focus to, because I felt so fragmented. And that was the whole aim of this, 6 months in Asia, about 10 years ago, 11 years ago. And what I arrived at was that at a certain level, all of these different teachings and traditions are pointing to the same thing. They are all, and that sounds cliche, we've heard this concept before. They all ultimately will lead to the same thing. Assuming that you approach any one of them with real sincerity. And sincerity is a very difficult thing. I think it's the most important quality for somebody trying to walk a spiritual path, is cultivating sincerity. So to answer your question, this is a long-winded answer because it's hard to answer it really quickly. Most people who are starting out on a path, they start to come up against relatively early on recognition of their shortcomings and their quote kind of issues or their imbalances. A person who is just starting out on the path will run away from those very quickly. And oftentimes that's when they leave that tradition or that practice or that system. They start to come up against their own bullshit and they don't have the maturity to go, oh, this must be true. There's some truth here. They'll go to the next thing because it's uncomfortable. A real path will push you all the way into your discomfort, all the way into it. A next stage of maturity is when you're not only going, I'm starting to see the things about myself that I don't really want to look at, but you're starting to go, I'm interested. I want to know and I'm willing to look. The next stage of real maturity is when a person is saying, not only am I willing to look, but I am actively seeking out shortcomings, weaknesses, imbalances, and I am open to the feedback that life is giving me about my deeply held patterns, conditionings, beliefs that are holding me back from real growth. And that requires incredible sincerity and honesty with oneself, and it requires incredible modesty and humility. And those qualities are not celebrated in Western culture. Western culture says bravado, confidence, gaining stuff, putting stuff on. That's what makes you strong and powerful and worthy of notice socially. So the things that help you in the world, in the material world, will undermine your spiritual growth. The things that support your spiritual growth can support your growth in the material world, but they're not necessarily compatible. So I say those things because just like we were talking about teaware in the last question, there is a natural attraction that you will have to a path that feels true to you, to your heart. It feels when you really tune in your meditation or when you're quiet, it's not intellectual, it will be a path that resonates with your heart, what we call qing xin, or clear heart. When your heart is clear, you can feel, I feel drawn to that thing. I feel drawn to that path. When you feel really drawn to a path, it should start challenging your ideas about who you are quite soon. It is a path of maturity to go, I'm willing to look. The most difficult thing is to stay with difficulty. A true path will force you to look at yourself in a really honest way. And if you stay with it, it will transform you. There is a wonderful saying in Taoism, which is a person of the world puts something on every day. More stuff, more ideas, more beliefs, more traditions, more spiritual knowledge, or whatever. A person of the world puts something on every day. A person of the Tao takes something off. So a real path, a real tradition will strip you of everything. It will strip you bare. And from there, there's freedom. There's the beginning of a path of freedom. So what I will say about pursuing one path is when you feel resonance with one and you feel that it resonates with your heart, start on that path. It will start to challenge you if it's a true path. Lean into it and allow yourself to dig deeper and deeper and deeper. Because whether it's, yoga or Taoism or Zen Buddhism or, theosophy or whatever, any one of those paths you can make real deep progress on. But you will never make progress if you dig a little hole and you read 2 books and then you go, I don't like it. And then you go dig another hole. I did that for a very long time. And it left me very confused and overwhelmed. When I started to dig into a very specific path, which for me is a Zen Buddhist path, and Taoism, they work together. They meet. Taoism comes from the earth up, which is, it's an earthy practice. You're doing all these movements based on studying animals and seasons. And out of Taoism, we have herbalism and acupuncture and Taoist arts and martial arts and all that. It comes from the earth up. Buddhism comes from the top down. It starts with the void. It starts with the absolute. Right in the middle where they meet is Zen. And Zen says, forget all the stuff on the outside. What about this moment and this moment and this moment? That's what's real in Zen. For me, Zen brought Taoism and Buddhism together, and all the other traditions I had studied, I was able to fold the elements in that were really relevant into Zen. But Zen is really very direct, and it's not a very heart-centered practice. It is at a certain point. But for a lot of people, they're going to feel like it's sterile or cold. And it can feel that way. Some people need a more, what I would say, earth-based or more feminine approach initially, or devotional practice, like a bhakti yoga or something. So again, each of us is unique and different. And so what is true for me is not going to be true for anybody else, even if they're in the same tradition. So it's really about finding something that resonates for you. Then what will you'll know it's true for you if it starts challenging your ideas of who you are. And then that's a test. Am I willing to continue to pursue this path? And if you do, it doesn't actually matter what tradition or lineage it is, you will grow and mature in that path. That is a very long-winded answer to your question. The last thing I want to say about it is that if T feels like a very genuine path to you and you really resonate strongly with it, you can still pursue Bhakti Yoga and study T. But what I will say is that T, the way of T is a path. Zen Buddhist practices and Taoist practices have already cultivated for thousands of years T as a way. So there's a lot of historical lineage to pull from in studying T. So I would encourage that, and I'm happy to make recommendations for books and other things. Our teachings around T are really out of the Taoist and Zen Buddhist traditions. We also have some very old practices that come out of shamanic traditions, which there are a lot of shamanic Taoist tradition or practices. So, I'll be teaching more about these components of the way of T, but if T really resonates with you and you don't already have a very clear, strong practice in another tradition, you might consider going deeper into Taoist and Zen Buddhist studies. Okay, I hope that wasn't way too long, but there's a lot to say about it.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So in my town here, I live in kind of a small, rural, conservative town in the middle of Indiana. And I do a lot of events here. I'm sort of a community organizer, and I also teach yoga here. And I was considering maybe hosting. I have two questions. This is one of them. I was considering hosting a tea ceremony event, and I was wondering, how does it work with charging people for a tea ceremony? Like, what does that have to do with the spirit of tea? And just, I mean, if you're honoring the guest as the deity at your altar, it just feels also a little bit strange to receive financial compensation. Like, just tell me your experience about that and how to navigate that.
Yeah. It's tricky because we all have to make a living. If at all possible, I would not charge for the event is my most sincere answer, because there's an energy that comes when you're just purely of service to people that is quite profound, and it's coming from a different place and people can feel that. So I would say don't charge if that is available and possible. If it is something that you need to cover the cost of getting help and support from other people, or it is something that is part of your livelihood, event coordination, the second best thing would be make it donation based. I would recommend not having you be the person who shares with people. If you would like to donate, here's how this money will be used, etc. I would have somebody else communicate that. Other than you, if you're the event coordinator. It is less awkward for the people because they feel less obligated from you. It's more coming from a third party. The third option, and you can suggest even a donation amount. The third option is you could set a price at a sliding scale, say between $10 and $30 or $30 and $50 or whatever feels appropriate to you. And what I would communicate to people is what the money is going towards. As long as you're transparent, there's nothing wrong. The most important thing is honesty. When you're honest and you're vulnerable with people and you say, hey, we are asking for a donation for this event, and that donation will go towards X, Y, and Z, and you're coming from your heart and you're really honest and sincere with people, they're not going to have a problem paying for it. And you can even say to them, if this is really a struggle for you financially, then please come and talk to me. Like, if you're vulnerable, they will be vulnerable back to you. In the same way that if you are respectful to people and you don't talk shit about people behind their back, then people can feel that and they will be respectful of you you will garner respect, and they won't talk smack about you behind your back.
Right.
These things, that's the way the world is, based on laws of reciprocity. There's as above, so below, but there's also as with it, without, so within. So how you're being in the world is how the world is going to be with you. That's the way that it works. So if you're vulnerable and honest and transparent, then people will be honest and transparent and vulnerable back to you. You know, I think the thing is to be direct and to be clear. You know, for me, I will speak for myself. For example, offering these classes in the meditations, for me, it feels really aligned for me to be offering them free of charge, because for me, this is a practice. This is my way. You know, if Living Tea and Mountain Gate, the tea house we're in, if they go out of business, which could happen, you know, we've had a tough past year because we haven't been able to open the tea house. I will still continue teaching tea and meditation and Chadao because it's my path. You know, it is who I am. I'm very blessed to know what I'm doing with my life energy. So I'll continue teaching one way or another, but it's also possible that someday, say if that happened, I would have to charge because it's part of my livelihood. I would just be honest and forthright and say, this is how I make a living. So if you can help me and make any donation, I would be deeply appreciative. Or, you know, I may start teaching classes to individuals who want to do like mentorships or small group classes. And for that, I will likely ask for a suggested donation to do those courses. Again, because, you know, we've got to make a living. We have lots of rent and employees and a lot of expenses, and it's a lot to bring all this beautiful tea and teaware here to share with people. So we all have to make a living, right? It's part of living in the world. So again, my primary recommendation is just to be vulnerable, be honest, and be direct, and be respectful, and you will receive that back to you in return. I don't think there's anything ethically wrong with asking for money. It's just energy, and you can communicate that to people. We've put a lot of energy and time and intention into creating this experience for you, and we are asking for a return of energy, both through your participation and your attention, but also if you can make a donation or help us, here's our suggested donation, and we deeply appreciate it. I've never run into a problem of somebody saying that there's somehow something ethically inappropriate about that. So.
Okay. My other question was, people around here are used to drinking things like soda and things that have a certain like sweet taste. And is there any, like, does it just make you cringe to have like a pot of honey on the table, or sugar or something like that? I'm just, because some people like the taste of tea, like they can't get over the taste.
Okay, here's what I'll say. This is a long answer, and I'm not going to answer the crazy long version because it gets into the history of the Dutch, French, and the English, and how tea was brought from China to Europe and Europe to the US, etc. If you're drinking really good tea in China with people who understand tea and you tried to introduce milk or honey or additives, they would look at you like you're an absolute crazy person, because you're diluting all of the subtlety and nuance of that particular tea. I'm a tea purist, so I would kind of cringe at that, but here's what I would recommend. There are certain teas like, you know, Gateway of Spirit purple tea, Ruby Red, Nymphaeos, those are red teas that we carry. Danchong, which is an oolong, Dongding oolong, Skyward, which is a Bantianyao. They're, you know, so in particular, oolongs and red teas that are quite sweet, and they're floral and they're complex. And those teas, you don't need honey because they're already sweet. Especially, okay, for people like that, you can brew Eastern Beauty, Danchong, and Skyward. Any one of those three, or Gateway of Spirit, any one of those 4 teas, or Nymphaeos, 5 teas. Those 5 teas, somebody who wants sweet will go, oh, this is so interesting. They're floral, they're sweet, they're complex, they're approachable. If you try to brew them some Liobao, like what I'm drinking, or some Chopur or something, they're gonna be like, whoa. If what you're used to is like Sprite or like, Coca-Cola, it's got literally like 56 grams of sugar, and you introduce some really healing pu'er tea that tastes like a mouthful of dirt, they're gonna go, this is gross. The other thing is that tea will start to detoxify people. If people have a lot of toxicity, really powerful healing tea will start detoxifying you almost immediately. I mean, I've seen crazy things happen, right? So if you're not cleaned out already and you start drinking healing herbs or healing teas, you can start to react in a way where you're like, I don't like it. Part of that is because the gut microbiota, right, that inhabit the stomach lining and the intestines, they feed on sugar, processed sugar. And if you have dysbiosis or you have imbalances of the wrong colonies of bacteria in the body, and they're used to getting processed sugar, and then you try to introduce really healing herbs, those microorganisms are like, whoa, 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 what are you doing? No bueno, don't like this environment. Those people, it would benefit them to start drinking healing teas, living teas. But you need to meet people where they're at. That's part of Chashi, right? Who's coming to your tea session? Think about that. Don't brew some crazy 30-year-old pu'er tea for somebody who's never even, who's only ever had maybe like English breakfast tea from Lipton's at a hotel, who's like, you're not going to brew 30-year-old pu'er for that person. They're going to think it's gross, first of all, and you're wasting really good tea on somebody who can't appreciate it. They're not going to like it. For that person, you brew some Eastern Beauty, you brew some Danchong, you brew sweet, floral, accessible teas where they go, oh, these flavors are wonderful. Meet them here. Meet people early on their tea journey. They need to be met in the mouth and the nose. And then over time, you go to the structure and body of the tea, and then you go to the body in terms of the qi. How does the qi, the cha qi, how does the energy of the tea work in the body? But you start at the mouth. You start with flavors. And if the person really loves the flavors, they'll come back and they'll try again. And over time, their spirit, their shen, and their body, their natural health. People want to be healthy. They want to feel good in their bodies, but they don't know how. So over time, they will start to realize, when I leave those tea sessions, I feel better. When I drink a Coca-Cola, I feel worse, or processed food, or microwave foods, or whatever. So meet people where they're at and start them at the area of the sensations that they will enjoy. You know?
Thank you.
Yep. All right. Well, this has been a long session. It's been a wonderful session. I love interacting with all of you. Jade and I and our son Lyndon have just been like hanging out drinking tea by ourselves for the last year. And you know, in the tea house by ourselves, or with a couple employees who work here, who send out your orders and who help us with operations and things. But this year has been so introverted and so quiet for so many people. It's really wonderful to start to branch out and connect with all of you. And, you know, hopefully in the next 6 months, things will really start to open up. And we're right now putting together a Qigong and tea, way of tea retreat this summer. That's going to be incredible, with one of my Qigong teachers, who is a remarkable woman and human being. And we're going to keep doing events and making videos and trying to share as much as we can about this beautiful way, because it has supported and enriched our lives so much. And we really hope for it to enrich and support all of your lives as well. And that's our whole aim here, is to try to share all that we've gained and pass it on and share it with all of you. So thank you so much for coming. We deeply appreciate your presence, and we hope you gained something valuable and meaningful from tonight's session. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Now I can't figure out how to get out of here. Ah.